Discovered in his chambers, the Virgin Omega who captured the attention of 5 Alpha Kings. She was not supposed to be there. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. Not the kings, not the palace staff, not the scribes who kept the official records of the 10th summit. Because if they talked about it, they would have to talk about everything. The 30 days, the fire, the provision, the girl who stood in the middle of 5 of the most powerful men in the known world and said, in a voice that did not shake even once, "I have a clause to offer." Nobody was ready for any of that. Seraphine certainly wasn't. She found out about the substitution on a Tuesday, which she would later think was a deeply unfair day for a life to change direction. Tuesdays had no drama in them. They were the kind of day where you ate something cold for lunch and forgot about it and found it again at 3 in the afternoon and just ate it anyway, because what else were you going to do? Dorwan, her supervisor at the Westgate household where she had worked since she was 16, knocked on the wall beside her door. He didn't knock on the door itself. That would have required him to believe she deserved that level of acknowledgement. He knocked on the wall, same as he always had. "Lena can't go," he said. "You're going instead." Seraphine looked up from the boot she was polishing. "Go where?" "The Neutral Palace. Summit service. 30 days. Residential wing. Inner chamber assignments." She went back to the boot. "I don't have clearance for summit service." "You do now. Lena broke 3 fingers this morning. Someone has to fill her spot. You're the same height. Your hands are small enough, and you haven't complained about anything in 4 years, which makes you manageable." He paused. "Pack tonight." He knocked on the wall again as he left. Some kind of goodbye. Seraphine sat with the boot in her hands for a moment. She thought about the inner chambers of the Neutral Palace, a building she had only ever seen from the road, gray and enormous, and surrounded by the kind of quiet that meant something serious was happening inside. The sort of quiet that was not peaceful but held, like the quiet inside a room where someone has just spoken and the words are still settling. She thought about the 5 Alpha Kings who would be holding their summit there, who had been holding their summit there every 10 years for a century, who between them controlled more land, more armies, and more trade routes than any single kingdom in recorded history. Men who did not need to raise their voices because the world arranged itself around the fact of them. She went back to polishing the boot. There was nothing else to do about it. The Neutral Palace sat at the exact center point of the 5 kingdoms' borders, which made it belong to no one, and therefore, in the way of all things that belong to no one, controlled by everyone. The building had been constructed 112 years ago by the first generation of the 5-King Compact, built for the specific purpose of having a place where men who could not trust each other's homes could still sit in the same room and make decisions that would outlive them both. It was, if nothing else, good architecture. Seraphine arrived with the second wave of service staff, which meant she had already been processed, registered, documented, scent-checked, and given a gray uniform before she ever saw the inside of a building. The processing line moved with the particular efficiency of a system that had been doing the same thing for a very long time. She had been through palace registration before. The Westgate household had its own intake procedure, but nothing quite like this. Every step mattered here. Every step had a name and a record. The scent check was standard. Every Omega in Summit service had to verify their suppressors were active and registered with the Palace Health Board. It was not a personal procedure. It was administrative. The head registrar, a tired woman with ink on 3 of her fingers and the expression of someone who had been doing this since before Seraphine was born, held the sensor up to her wrist, waited for the reading, made a mark in her ledger, and moved on to the next person. Seraphine's suppressor compound read as active. This was correct. She had mixed it that morning, same as every morning since she was 17, from the recipe her mother had pressed into the back page of a water-damaged prayer book and handed to her without explanation. Her mother had been very good at handing things over without explanation. It was maybe the one skill she'd passed on cleanly, along with the knowledge that some things were worth protecting and some things were worth hiding, and sometimes those were the same thing. Seraphine took the gray uniform, folded it under her arm, and followed the line of staff into the east wing. She was, by any measure, invisible. She intended to stay that way. The inner chamber was not what she expected. She had expected something like the grand rooms she'd seen in illustrated broadsheets, all marble and high ceilings, and the kind of furniture that makes you feel guilty for existing near it. And the ceilings were high, and there was marble, but the room itself felt worked in, used, like a room that knew exactly what it was for and had stopped caring about impressing anyone. The kind of room that had seen enough important things that it didn't need to announce itself. There was a long table in the center. 5 chairs on one side, which struck her as odd. You'd expect them arranged around the table, not all on one side like a tribunal, but she supposed when you were the 5 most powerful alpha kings in the world, you didn't feel the need to explain your seating preferences to the room. There was a fireplace at each end. A set of shelves along the south wall, already stocked with documents and rolled maps and the kind of ledgers that meant serious arithmetic had been done, and done more than once, and probably argued about. A side table for meals, because even world-shaping political negotiations required people to occasionally eat lunch. Her job was simple: keep the fireplaces going, clear the meal table when signaled, replace the water pitchers twice a day, stay quiet, stay invisible. She had been staying quiet and invisible her whole life. This she thought she could do. The kings arrived on the morning of the first day. She heard them before she saw them, boots on the corridor floors, the specific kind of sound that comes from people who have never in their lives had to make themselves lighter when they walked. Then the doors opened and 5 men came into the room, and the air changed the way air changes when something that has been held in a closed space is finally opened. Not just 5 men, 5 gravitational fields entering a room at once. She was behind the service screen in the corner, checking the stack of firewood. She did not look up. She heard 5 chairs scrape, then silence, then the low sound of men beginning to do the work of kings, which sounded, from behind a service screen, almost like ordinary conversation. The same rhythms, the same pauses, just with more weight underneath. She stacked the last 3 pieces of birch, counted them, stacked them again, made sure the tinder was accessible, checked the ash catch. She left without looking at any of them. Outside, in the service corridor, she leaned against the wall for 1 second. Just one. Then she walked to the east fireplace room to do the same thing all over again. Day 4 was when everything started to go wrong. She noticed it in the morning, before she even entered the wing. Something was off. Not wrong in any way she could name with a word. More like a thinning. The compound felt thin, the way fabric feels thin when you've washed it too many times and you can feel it before you can see it. By noon, she understood. The compound was running low. She stood in the small storage alcove off the service corridor, holding the glass jar, doing the math that she already knew the answer to. She had mixed enough for 6 days. She had always mixed for 6 days because she had never needed more than 6 days at a stretch. She had not planned for 30. She had not in 4 years at the Westgate household ever been sent anywhere for 30 consecutive days. She needed yarrow root to mix more. Yarrow root, dried elder bloom, pressed starflower, and one other thing her mother always just called the gray stuff, which she had spent several years patiently identifying as a specific kind of dried lichen that grew on coastal rocks and was extremely difficult to find inland, and which no one seemed to stock unless they had a specific reason to. She went to the palace supply room. No yarrow root. She went to the kitchen herb stores. No yarrow root. She went to the small medicinal cabinet near the staff quarters, which had been stocked by whoever stocked such things for the summit, and which was full of headache powder and stomach settlers and absolutely nothing that would help her. She stood in front of that cabinet for a long time. Then she made a decision she would spend a long time later classifying as either very brave or very stupid, depending on the day she was having when she thought about it. She mixed the compound with what she had. Half the right ingredients, the rest approximated from what was available. It would hold maybe for 2 more days. Maybe a little longer if she was careful. She told herself 2 days was enough time to figure something out. She was, it turned out, not entirely wrong, just not right in the way she expected. The moment she walked into the inner chamber that evening, she knew, not from anything she felt internally, from the room itself. She had carried firewood into that room 4 times a day for 4 days. She knew how it sounded when it was occupied. She knew the particular quality of men in conversation that filled it, that low, consistent hum of argument and deliberation, and the occasional silence that meant someone was making a point by not speaking. This was not that sound. This was silence. She was halfway to the fireplace before she registered it fully, and by then it was too late to leave without making the leaving a thing. So she didn't. She kept walking. She set down the firewood. She arranged it by size, smallest to largest, because that was what she was there to do, and she did her job with the careful precision of someone who was using their hands to keep the rest of themselves very still. Nobody in the room said anything. She turned to collect the dinner tray. Kalis, and she did not know his name yet. She only knew him as the one at the far left, who never seemed to move his head when he moved his eyes, spoke. He said her name, her full name. She had never told anyone in this palace her name. She was on no register under her real name. She was listed under the substitution paperwork as Lena, a name that was not hers, a name belonging to a woman with 3 broken fingers who was currently at home in bed. She picked up the dinner tray. She walked to the door. She left. Behind her, she heard nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. 5 kings holding still. She walked down the service corridor, around the corner, through the east wing door, and into the stairwell, where she sat on the 3rd step and held the dinner tray in her lap and breathed, just breathed, for about 30 seconds. Then she stood up, took the tray to the kitchen, and spent the rest of the night in her room trying to figure out what to do, while the compound she had mixed with half the right ingredients quietly did less and less of what she needed it to do. She made a decision. She would be professional. She would complete her assignment. She had been assigned to 30 days of summit service, and she would do 30 days of summit service, and she would do it the same way she had done every difficult thing in her adult life, by being so good at the job that nobody had a reason to look past it. Her scent could not be fixed right now, but she could fix everything else. She could be so competent, so quiet, so functionally invisible in every other way, that the scent became background, something the kings noted and moved past, an inconvenience. A variable they filed and forgot. She had, after all, spent her whole life making herself easier to ignore than to see. She could do it for 26 more days. She went back in the next morning and did her job. What she had not accounted for was that 5 very different men would notice her in 5 completely different ways, and that none of those ways would feel like what she had expected. She had prepared for a particular kind of attention, the kind she knew how to carry without breaking anything. That was not what happened. What happened was stranger and, in its own way, more difficult. Kalis was the hardest to read. He was the king of the northern reaches, and he moved through every room like he had already decided how it ended before he arrived. Not arrogant exactly, more like finished, like the internal calculation had already run, and he was simply waiting for events to catch up with his conclusions. He was quiet, in a way that was different from the others' quiet. The others were quiet because they were listening, or thinking, or choosing their words. His quiet felt like it was the baseline, and everything else was the exception. He did not look at her directly, or rather, he looked at her directly only when she was not looking, which she knew because she felt it the same way you feel sunlight move across your back on a cold day, present but not touching, warm without contact. On day 6, she noticed that the documents on the council table had been arranged differently. They were usually stacked by kingdom, a filing system she had followed every morning. Now they were sorted by subject, which was a more useful system and also one that required someone to read their contents in order to arrange them correctly. She understood, after a moment, that this was intentional. She sorted them correctly under the new system, put them back in their new order, and left without saying anything about it. The next day, there were more documents, and a book tucked under the bottom of the stack. Fiction. Old enough that the spine had cracked and been repaired with a different color of thread. She checked the title, set it aside to dust the table underneath it, picked it back up and, almost without deciding to, opened to the first page. She read 12 pages before she realized she was still in the room. Kalis was sitting at the end of the table with a set of maps in front of him. He was not looking at the maps. She put the book down, finished the table, left. The book was there again the next morning, open to page 13. She didn't know what to do with any of it, so she did what she always did with things she didn't know what to do with. She thought about them while she was doing something else, and she kept doing her job, and she did not let herself want anything from it. She read the book, though. Over the following 4 days, on her breaks, when she knew the room was empty, she read all of it. Dravith was the king of the Iron Coast, and he was the most impossible person she had ever been in a room with, and she meant that in the most neutral way she could find. He talked. Not to the room, not in the way kings talked when they were performing for the people around them, that particular cadence that meant they were aware of the audience and adjusting accordingly. He talked to her specifically, in the way you talk to someone you have decided is a real person regardless of whether the situation technically calls for you to think so. Birch or oak? He asked her on day 5, while she was stacking the wood. She looked at the wood. For heat or for smell? Both. Oak for heat. Birch, if you want the room to smell like something other than whatever's happening in here. He laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. The kind that doesn't wait for permission. He had a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw, which she had noticed the first time she saw him because it was impossible not to, and when he laughed, the scar moved in a way that made the whole thing look like his face was enjoying a private joke that only the scar was in on. "What do you think is happening in here?" he asked. 5 kings trying to share power without anyone having to admit they're sharing it. The room went quiet for a second. The other kings, who had been mid-argument, had apparently also heard this. Then Dravith laughed again, and 2 of the other kings made sounds she chose not to interpret, and she picked up the ash catch and left. He found reasons to talk to her every day after that. Small things. What was for dinner, whether she thought the east or west fireplace pulled better, if she had ever seen the Iron Coast. She answered in the shortest sentences she could manage that were still technically answers, and he seemed to find this approach genuinely delightful rather than discouraging, which was not a reaction she had encountered before. On day 9, he told her he had a sister. He said it in the middle of a conversation about the wood. She had just said she still preferred oak for the cold nights, and he had nodded, and then said, without any transition, "I have a sister who presented as Omega in a kingdom that used to carry the old claim provision." He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. She was 15. I was 12. I couldn't do anything. Then he asked her whether she wanted him to check if the palace apothecary had come back with its weekly restock, and she said yes, and he nodded and walked toward the door. She did not say anything about the other thing. Neither did he. But when the apothecary restock came the next morning, there was a small packet of dried herbs left on the service screen. She picked it up, opened it carefully. It was not yarrow root. He would not have known to look for yarrow root specifically, but it was close enough that she could work with it. She remixed the compound that night. It held for 4 more days. Solène, king of the Amber provinces, was beautiful in a way she found genuinely irritating, and she wanted to be clear in her own mind that the irritation had nothing to do with the beauty itself. She had been around beautiful people before. Beautiful people existed in the world the same way cold weather did. You acknowledged them, you adjusted your clothing accordingly, and you kept moving. It was more that Solène seemed to know exactly how the beauty functioned, which tools it gave him, and he used those tools with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped finding them interesting. Charm that precise was not warmth. It was craftsmanship. She could see the mechanism every time he deployed it, which meant the charm never quite landed on her the way it was probably designed to. She watched it arrive and felt it redirect slightly, like light hitting glass at the wrong angle. He did not talk to her the way Dravith did. He did not leave things for her the way Kalis did. He was simply aware of her. She felt it differently than the others, not focused exactly. More like peripheral attention that was always there, a secondary awareness that never fully switched off, like a candle lit in an adjacent room that you can see the light of without seeing the flame. On day 11, he broke routine. He poured his own tea. She had been reaching for the pot to do it. That was her job. That was why she was standing at that table at that moment. And his hand came across and poured the cup himself with such smooth easiness that it took her 2 seconds to understand what had just happened. Then he held the cup out to her. She looked at it. "For you," he said. "You have been on your feet since the morning service." She looked at the cup, then at him. She said, "I don't drink tea." It wasn't true. She drank tea constantly, at every opportunity, but something in the moment required her to say something that was not yes, and that was the thing that came out. She took the cup back to the service screen anyway, and set it down there, where she could look at it while she finished her work. She did not drink it while he was in the room. Later, when the session had broken and only Solène remained, he always left last, she had noticed, like he was cataloging what the room looked like, empty. He paused in the doorway. He did not turn around. "The palace apothecary keeps yarrow root in the second cabinet," he said. "Not the first. The first is where they put everything that runs out. The second is where they keep the things that actually matter." He left before she could answer. She stood in the empty room. The wall clock ticked. The fire in the east hearth was burning down to the good kind of heat. She went to the apothecary, second cabinet, right where he said. She stood in front of the yarrow root for a long time before she took it. Long enough that the apothecary's assistant came in, looked at her, looked at what she was looking at, and quietly found somewhere else to be. Rael was the youngest of the 5 kings and the most dangerous, and she meant dangerous in the specific way that open, honest people are dangerous. Because you never know what to do with them. You know how to handle sharpness and distance and performance. You do not have a prepared response to sincerity. He had come to his throne at 19 through a succession crisis that every broadsheet in the 5 kingdoms had covered in breathless, somewhat ghoulish detail for months. His older brother, his father, and his uncle had all died within the same 14-month window. The arithmetic of it was the kind that people whispered about at dinner tables, and then went quiet when someone walked in. Rael had been 19, the youngest of 4 sons, the one nobody had been preparing for anything, and he had woken up one morning to discover he was the only one left. He was 23 now. He carried the crown the way someone carries something they found at the side of the road, not sure yet whether they found it or it found them, not sure yet whether to keep it or set it back down, just walking with it because they are already walking and they are not sure where the setting down place is. She noticed him because he was the only one of the 5 who apologized for things that were not his fault. He apologized when she had to step around him to reach the fireplace. He apologized when she arrived to clear the table and the dishes were stacked in a way he felt was inconvenient for her, even though rearranging dishes was literally her job. He apologized once, on day 9, for a spill that had been made by someone else entirely and which she had already cleaned up before he arrived. She did not say anything about the apologizing, but she noticed it. On day 12, he asked her directly, "Are you afraid of us?" She was stacking cups. She kept stacking. "No." "You're lying," he said. "Not accusatory. Just accurate, in the way of someone who has had a lot of practice recognizing the thing people say, instead of the truth." "I'm cautious," she said. "It's different." "How is it different?" She thought about it. Set the last cup down. Afraid is when you don't know what to do. Cautious is when you know exactly what to do and you're doing it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said in this room in 12 days. And yesterday, Dravith admitted he doesn't actually understand land tariffs." She didn't smile, but she almost did. On day 16, she went out to the servants' terrace after the evening service to stand in the cold for a few minutes. The cold was a thing that was just what it was. No complications, no subtext, just cold, and the dark, and the particular stillness of a night that hasn't decided what it's going to do yet. Rael was already there. She nearly went back inside. "I'm not in the way, am I?" he asked, which was a strange question on a terrace 20 feet wide. "No," she said. She stood on the other end. He stayed on his end. They stood there for a full hour in the cold, not talking, looking at nothing in particular together, and it was the most uncomplicated she had felt in 2 weeks. Just two people in the cold, not saying anything, which required nothing of her and took nothing from her, which she realized afterward was the thing she had needed more than she had known. He went inside first. At the door he paused. "You know," he said, "for what it's worth, I think you are probably the most capable person in this building." She said, "I know how to stack wood and pour water." "Yes," he said. "And you do both, while 5 kings argue about the fate of the continent, and you don't drop a single piece, and you have not looked frightened once, and I have been watching, because I was also very young and completely unready once, and I know what that looks like, and you do not look like that." He went inside. She stayed on the terrace for another 20 minutes after that, in the cold, looking at nothing, thinking about the word capable, and how she had never once in her life applied it to herself, and what it meant that it had come from the mouth of a king who had every reason to think only of himself. Then there was Mordecai. He was the eldest of the 5, and the official procedural authority of the compact, not in terms of power over the other kings, who would have quietly laughed at that framing, but in terms of mechanism. He was the one who called sessions to order, who held the official seals, who made sure the enormous paperwork of world-altering decisions was correctly filed and correctly recorded and would survive the men who made them. He kept the whole machine of the compact running, and he did this without making it visible that he was the one doing it, which was its own particular skill. He watched everything. She had noticed this from the first day, the way his eyes moved around any room on a regular silent rotation, not suspicious, not anxious, thorough, like a man who had learned a long time ago that the most important thing happening in any room was usually the thing you were not looking at directly. He watched her the way he watched everything else, present, thorough, and without anything in it that felt like appetite. She found this, oddly, the easiest to bear. On day 13, he called her back as she was leaving. He waited until the other kings had stepped out for their afternoon break, and then he said, very plainly, "You are unregistered." She stopped walking, did not turn around. "Your suppressor compound is not standard issue," he said. "It is a personal preparation. Your designation is not in any palace register under either your real name or the name on the substitution paperwork. You came in on a substitute arrangement with no prior summit clearance. I have known this since day 5. She turned around then. He was looking at her with the same composed expression he brought to every situation. Neutral, considered, the face of a man who had decided long ago that showing his reactions was a choice, and not always the right one. "I am not reporting it," he said. She waited. "I am telling you because you should know the situation you are in, and because one of the other kings has already checked the servant register for your full name." She waited. "Which one?" "I won't tell you that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you protecting me?" "I am not protecting you," he said. "I am managing the situation." Those sound like the same thing. Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, an acknowledgement, maybe, of a point well made. "Yes," he said, "sometimes they are." He looked back at his documents. The conversation apparently was over. She stood there for another second. "Thank you," she said. He did not look up. "Do not thank me yet." She found out what he meant on day 17. He came to find her in the service corridor, which was significant by itself, because none of the kings ever came to the service corridor. It was a narrow space that smelled like firewood and ash and the very specific mineral smell of clean stone, and he told her what she had not known, what she had no way of knowing, because she was not a legal scholar, and she was not from a kingdom with a compact education, and her mother had, true to form, handed her the suppressor recipe and not the surrounding context. He explained the old provision. She stood in the service corridor holding a stack of clean water pitchers and listened to him explain that under a 112-year-old law that nobody had ever bothered to repeal because nobody had ever needed to invoke it, an unregistered, unclaimed Omega who had been in private proximity to 5 Alpha Kings for more than 15 consecutive days could be legally claimed by any of them without her consent, as a matter of preventing what the original legal text called designation-based instability during an active summit. He explained it the way you might explain a weather system. Here is the condition, here is what it produces, here is the full range of possible outcomes. She stood with the pitchers. She did not drop them. I have been blocking the legal mechanism, he said, each morning, through procedural delay. I have been doing this since day 5. I can continue for another 9 days. After that, I have exhausted all available procedural road. She looked at the pitchers. There were 6 of them. She was supposed to deliver them to the east wing, then the west wing, then fill the sideboard in the inner chamber for the evening session. You said I had options, she said. 3, he said, and he listed them. Leave, register under one of the king's households, or stay and trust his procedural blocking to hold. And the 4th option? She said. He went still. Not surprised. She had not surprised him. She suspected he was not suppressible, but something in the quality of his attention changed slightly, the way a room changes when a window opens in it. There isn't one. There's always a 4th option, she said. Give me a few days. He looked at her with that complete, thorough attention for a moment. She picked up the pitchers and walked to the east wing. She had work to do. She did not flee. She could have. Mordecai had offered it cleanly, without strings, without making her feel the weight of the offer. She could have been out of the neutral palace by the next morning, back on a road, back in the ordinary world of service work and suppressor compound and the specific practice of making herself small. She thought about it for most of day 18. She sat with it the way you sit with a bad tooth, aware of it, pressing on it occasionally, trying to decide if it was the kind of thing you dealt with now or the kind you carried until it forced the issue. Then she went to the library shelf in the inner chamber. Not the fiction book, the legal texts, the compact documents, the founding records and their appendices, which had been sitting on that shelf for 30 days, which she had been dusting and restocking and organizing around without ever opening, because that was not what she was there for. She opened them. She was not a lawyer. She had not studied law. Most of the formal compact language required her to read sentences twice, sometimes 3 times, to untangle what they were actually saying from the structure they were saying it in. She read carefully. She read slowly. She made no notes because she had nothing to make notes with, and she was not going to steal a pen from the council table. But she read carefully enough that she did not need to write it down. She found the clause on the evening of day 20, in the appendix of the founding compact, in a section that had clearly been written for a specific diplomatic situation, one that had since been resolved and which everyone had apparently filed and forgotten. She read it 4 times. Designation neutrality, in service of multi-kingdom interests. She stayed in the inner chamber past her service hours that night reading it, which she had never done before, and when Rael came back to retrieve something he had left on the table, he found her at the shelf with the founding compact open in both hands. He looked at the document. He looked at her. He said, very carefully, "Is that the founding compact appendix?" "Appendix C," she said, "the neutrality clause." A pause. Did Mordecai know about this? "I don't know," she said, "but I do." He looked at her for a long time. Something in his expression was very still, in a way that was different from his usual stillness. Not managed, just present. "Good," he said, very quietly. He left without his forgotten item. On day 26, Mordecai told her the blocking mechanism had reached its end. She said, "I know. Call a session. I need to speak." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain?" "No," she said, "but call it anyway." He called the session for mid-morning on day 27. She stood in the inner chamber with all 5 of them for the first time as something other than the person clearing the dinner tray. The same room, the same table, the same 5 chairs. But she was standing on the other side of the service screen, and the quality of the space was entirely different, and her hands were still. She explained the neutrality clause. She had rehearsed it in her head 400 times over the preceding days, in her room at night, in the service corridor, in the kitchen, anywhere she had a moment alone. She knew where the legal weight sat. She knew which words mattered. She laid it out plainly and completely, and when she was finished, she set the documentation on the table and waited. Dravith moved first. He picked up the document, read it, set it down. Then he looked at her with the expression she'd catalogued as his most honest one. He laughed. Not the loud room-filling laugh, not the dry strategic one. Something quieter, something that sounded like surprise that had become something else on the way out. Kalis asked where she had found the clause. She told him the shelf. He looked at the shelf. Something crossed his face that she filed away for later. Mordecai said the clause was valid. Solène said, "You could have left." "I know," she said. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. "Why didn't you?" She thought about it. "Because leaving is something I already know how to do," she said. "I wanted to find out if I knew how to do something else." Rael had not said anything. His hands were flat on the table. He looked at her with the most unguarded expression she had ever seen on him and said, quietly, "Do you have everything you need for the invocation?" "I need 5 signatures," she said. One by one, across the table, each of them signed. The last 4 days of the summit were different. Nothing changed in the visible sense. The fireplaces still needed tending, the water pitchers still needed filling, the dinner tray still needed clearing. But the room had a different quality, like a held breath that had been let out, like the air after rain, when everything is exactly where it was before, but cleaned down to itself. She noticed things she had been too focused to notice before. The way Kalis read people, not just listened to them but read them, the same way he read text, systematically and completely, accounting for every element before he let himself respond. She had assumed this was strategy. She understood now it was also care. Knowing where everything was so nothing could become a surprise. Protecting a perimeter by never letting himself be caught without information. The way Dravith's loudness had a shape and a purpose to it. Not just noise. Structure. He occupied the space that might otherwise fill with tension. He made rooms safer by filling them with something that could be managed. She thought about his sister. She thought about a 12-year-old boy who couldn't protect someone, and spent the following decade learning to walk into any room and own the temperature of it. The way Solène's beauty was a thing he carried like a tool he was tired of sharpening. All that efficiency, all that precision. It had made him very good at the surface of things and perhaps a little slower to trust anything beneath. The 3-second glances, she understood now, were not assessment. They were checking, making sure she was still there, making sure what he had seen was real. The way Rael had chosen honesty as a daily decision, not a default. He had the same education as the others. He knew the same distances. He chose every morning not to use them, which was not naivety. It was the specific bravery of someone who had been very alone and decided that walls were not actually protection. They were just a way of being alone in company. And Mordecai, who held everything in and showed almost none of it, and who had blocked a legal mechanism for her every single morning for 13 days before he told her what he was doing, which meant he had been protecting her before she knew she needed it, and had asked nothing in return except that she understand her situation fully. She thought about all of this in the service corridor, in the 2 minutes between the morning and evening rounds. She thought about what it meant to be seen by people who had every reason not to see you. She didn't have an answer, but she had the question, which was more than she'd arrived with. The Kings left in stages on day 30, the morning the summit officially closed. She was in the inner chamber when they came in, one by one and then together. There was no protocol for this. This was something outside the official record. Kalis came first. He set a folded piece of paper on the service screen without a word. She looked at it. It was sealed. She looked at him. He had the same composed expression he always carried, except there was something very slightly different about it, a quality she had not seen in 30 days, like a window cracked an inch on a still day. "Read it after," he said. "Not a request, an instruction, delivered with care." He left. She put the paper in her pocket without opening it. Dravith came next, and did not leave anything on the service screen. "Iron Coast," he said. "Harbor office. Ask for Ven. She knows where I am. If you ever want to. Not if it makes sense, or if the timing works out. If you ever want to." She said, "I heard you the first time. I've only said it once. I've been hearing it for 27 days, she said. He stood there with his smile, the scar moving with it. Then he knocked on the door frame. 2 knocks, same as Dorwan's knock on her wall in a different life. Except this one felt like something different entirely. He left. Rael did not knock on anything. He crossed the room in 4 steps and he hugged her. She was surprised enough that she did not respond for a moment. And then she did, her hands coming up, and she held on for exactly as long as it took for something knotted in her chest to settle. He stepped back. His eyes were very bright. "You know what you are?" he said. "I've got a general sense of it now," she said. He almost laughed. Then he pressed his mouth together and nodded once, agreeing with something she hadn't said, and left. Solène paused in the doorway of the inner chamber. He turned. He looked at her for 3 seconds, then away. "The world," he said, "is more interesting than it was 30 days ago." He walked out without waiting for her response, which she appreciated, because she did not have one ready. Mordecai was last. He came in without hurrying, because Mordecai did nothing without full intention, and set a document on the table. She recognized the format immediately. Official compact paper, the seals of all 5 kingdoms already affixed, the particular weight of something that has been made permanent. She walked to the table and looked at it. Her name at the top. Her full name, not the substitute's name, not a household registration, not a service record. Her name, her designation, and below it, in the precise formal language of compact law, the registration under designation neutrality, the first such registration in 300 years. Legal. Permanent. Hers. "That is your copy," Mordecai said. "The official record is filed in the compact archive and cannot be revised by any single king's decision. It would require unanimous consent of all 5 to alter, which," he paused, very slightly, "I do not anticipate." She picked up the document. It weighed almost nothing. She felt it like it weighed everything. She looked at him. He was watching her with that full, complete attention of his, the attention that went all the way to the back of whatever it landed on. "You were always worth protecting," he said. She opened her mouth. He was already walking to the door. "Mordecai." He paused, did not turn. "Why did you start blocking the mechanism before you told me?" She asked. "You knew on day 5, you could have told me on day 5, and given me all 30 days to decide." He was quiet for a moment. "Because on day 5, he said, you did not yet know that you could stay." He left. She stood alone in the inner chamber. The east fire was burning low. She reached for the firewood. The water pitcher needed filling. She picked it up. The ash catch needed clearing. She did that too. She moved through the room the same way she had moved through it every day for 30 days. The same tasks, the same care, the same hands, everything that was hers, in the only ways things had ever been hers. She finished. She stood in the center of the room and looked at it. The long table, the 5 chairs, the south wall with its shelves full of documents, the 2 fireplaces holding the last of the day's heat, the high windows letting in the gray-white light of a morning that had not yet decided what kind of day it wanted to be. She took the folded paper from her pocket. Kalis's letter. She opened it. Read it once. Read it again. 1 paragraph. Dense, precise, More of him in it than anything he had said in 30 days, which was saying a great deal. She folded it back up. She had the compact document in her other hand. She looked at it once more. Her name, her designation, her legal standing in the world, clean and complete, and hers in a way that nothing had ever been hers before. She put both things in her pockets, one on each side. She picked up her kit. She walked to the door of the inner chamber. She walked through it, not running, not making herself smaller than she was, not pressing against walls, not practicing invisibility like it was a kind of safety, not arriving at doors and waiting for permission. She walked out into the corridor, and through the east wing, and down the main passage of the neutral palace, and out through the front gate into the morning air. Cold, clear, the kind of air that doesn't have any opinion about you. The neutral palace rose up behind her, gray and enormous and quiet, in the way it had always been quiet, the held kind, the kind that meant something serious had happened inside. Something serious had. In front of her was the road. It went in several directions, which was more directions than she'd had access to in a long time. She stood there for a moment. Then she started walking. End,